Good evening, everybody. Really great to have you to join us for this session today, all about the National Plan for Music Education, what next for schools. We're going to be talking about self-evaluation and development plans. My name's Catherine Barker. I am President-elect of the Music Teachers Association, and I am also working in United Learning as the lead for music and performing arts in the Trust. That's a large I'm going to call it a schools group actually. It's not just academies, there are also independent schools in the trust, primary, prep, secondary, the whole thing. So really, really interesting job that I have in my proper job, my day job, but I also do lots of work with the Music Teachers Association, which has brought me in this way as well. So in the session today, we're going to spend time doing a little bit of recap about what is in the plan, what is in the national plan that was launched last summer. It is, I know in some ways been a little bit contentious because there's some quite ambitious things in there that the DfE would like everyone to really strive for. But really the hard work now is to us as educators working in schools across the country, across England, about taking it forwards and thinking about how we can begin to deliver the plan in our own settings. As you can see, this is like a webinar meeting format. So everyone's got their cameras on, everyone can talk, but I'd ask you please kindly if you could put yourselves on mute, but it's actually really nice to have videos on screen because then I can kind of gauge your responses and see your lovely smiley faces and know that there are some actual real people out there. So by all means, have your camera on, wave and say hello, and if you want to even write in the chat, hi, my name's whatever, and I'm working in this context, it would be really lovely to hear from you because I've been sat at home all day today doing lots of work and it's just nice to have some real people at the end of the line. So let's crack on. As I said, the beginning of this session is about just giving some context to the national plan, so let's start with that. So as you all know, the plan was launched last summer. I was one of the people who was asked to be part of the expert panel. There were groups of teachers and people working in wider strategic roles in education on the panel. There are people who are working for youth music organisations, people working in the music sector, people from the Arts Council, people from the DfE, a large variety of people were working on it. And what was particularly interesting about the working party for it is that it included people that were both from the DfE and from DCMS, which is quite unusual for them to work together in that way. And I think that shows the sort of commitment and drive there was to move it forward at that time. We have since, of course, had a different minister, so we shall see how that all transpires. And in fact, the minister changed during the project as well. But I think rest assured there are people at the DfE who are assigned to this. There's a meeting that I'm going to on Thursday morning about that. So they're still wanting to push it through, and the work still continues despite the change in leadership. So the plan itself is a very long document. It is a long, wordy document. But despite its length, I think it does provide some clarity to people working in schools. I think the first thing that people working in schools really need to hang on to is this clarity around the 7 key features of high quality school music provision. I'm just going to move that in case you can see it. There we go, be better. And the simple, this really is the start of a simple conversation for schools about what have we got, what is actually taking place, and if we don't have some of these things, how can we make it possible? Not necessarily why not, but how can we make these things come to life? And it's not rocket science. This is the stuff that those of us who are really deeply involved in music education as young people and our families, experience and most people's experience in music education would expect. So firstly, we talk about timetable curriculum music, perhaps drawing on the model music curriculum, but it needs to be at least as ambitious as the national curriculum, at least 1 lesson a week. Some people are kind of focusing on this hour thing. For me, that's not really a massive issue. I think it's about having regular, consistent provision because that is about building skills over time. If it's like a music drop-down day, it's possible that all that learning is just going to disappear. And especially needs to be around the whole year. So if provision is only happening, for example, for like a term of the year or within a carousel, that's not going to be as successful in terms of curriculum provision. That comes through on the Ofsted research review as well, I think, quite clearly. Then there's a point about access to lessons across a range of instruments. Now, in the primary space, which is what I anticipate most of you are working in, that might mean access to whole class ensemble tuition. It might mean like large group tuition, but also I would argue like through the curriculum as well. Are we using instruments? Are we making really good use of that? But we would expect also to be thinking about progression routes. So if you're starting to learn an instrument in a large group, what scope is there for it to be continued if things, if things are working really well and the students are really keen to continue and they've got an aptitude and all that kind of stuff. Then there's mention about the type of ensemble opportunities, both through singing and through playing. And the DFE kind of aspiration through the plan is that every school should have some kind of choir / vocal ensemble and some kind of ensemble / band / group. And I think perhaps there's a consideration that, a band could be like just a small band of 4 or 5 students, but really if the curriculum is working really well and students are getting good access to instruments, we probably expect something that's more substantial than that. But none of that's possible without rehearsal space, resources, and space, in fact, for students to practice. Now, I know this is a particularly challenging area for primary schools, for small schools that don't necessarily have, rows and corridors of practice rooms. In fact, I don't see many academies or secondary schools with rows and rows of practice rooms because they make great offices. But I think there is this expectation, this particularly in view of like social justice, that if young people don't have a drum kit at home, I mean, not many people have drum kits at home, partly because of the noise, but the space and the cost and all of that, where is it possible for them to rehearse? And we can be the gatekeepers and facilitate that kind of thing. So space is a really important part. It's kind of a central part of a music offer in a school. And once all of that happens, everyone's been rehearsing, they've been in their brilliant groups, they also need to have opportunities to perform. So recognizing that music is not just about process, it's also about product, those landing moments where people feel really proud, feel excited to be involved, get hooked, want to do more. We all know those moments where we've been involved in a really great performance, particularly things like school productions, and students come afterwards and say, when's the next one? When can we do it again? So tapping into all of that excitement around performance, and linked to that, the opportunity to see live performance is also important for all schools. Now, there's no constraints around that. It could be seeing other students, it could be seeing professional musicians, it could be seeing community musicians. Anything is possible, but to show that music is to recognise that a lot of people will leave education and their main connection with music will be as a listener, as an audience member, as somebody who appreciates music, and we begin to sort of embed that and thread that into the work that we're doing in schools. Now, loads of schools are going to find this really straightforward, and I think by the sheer fact that you have given up your 5 o'clock till 6 o'clock on a Tuesday evening on a cold September day, I think you're the kind of people who are probably already doing these things. This is my gut feeling. But some schools may be further away and on the journey with that. So this is something we're going to look at over this session in terms of how we might be able to build those things and put them in place. But I can particularly see how some schools might find it challenging. So, for example, if you're in a smaller school, and particularly primary schools, I think some of this stuff is quite tricky for you to find the time and the local expertise to be able to pull this together. I think it's something that we need to be really mindful of, the challenges that some schools may have in bringing this to life in their own settings. Let's go on. So the other aspects that I think schools really need to kind of hang on to from the plan are these 3 key points. One is about leadership. Now, I'm guessing again, because you've engaged with this session, that you might be involved in subject leadership in your school, in your primary school. And what the plan really wanted to underline was that there is a necessity to recognise the need for direction for music. Music is quite a complex subject in schools. Unlike other subjects, you are relating to lots of people externally. So you might have a relationship with the hub, you might have a relationship in some way with your local community, with your secondary school, you might be linked into the music department there in some way. There might be freelance musicians that you're bringing into the school, and parents, and organising trips and all that sort of thing, in the same way that, well, in a way that a maths lead in the school doesn't really necessarily have all those links. So we definitely need to have leadership around the subject. And I would say that's not just about direct subject leadership, but links into the SLT, so a clear SLT link, and maybe even some kind of governance awareness. So some schools will have a named governor, but at least have an awareness with your local governing body. If you're in an academy trust, there are going to be trustees, but through the scheme of delegation, there will also be a local governing body who will be wanting to think about this area of curriculum provision. There's also something in the plan about music development plans. So these should capture the curricular and co-curricular offer and set out how it's going to be organised and potentially funded. And people like me who work in schools groups and multi-academy trusts are going to be putting sort of like larger scale versions of these together. Hopefully this is quite in line with the normal language of school improvement. Most people need to do a subject like department development plan. And that's what we're going to look at in this session. I don't think there's any plans for people to have to submit these or anything formal, but what they would like to do is people to start thinking about it over this year, so that by September 2023, most people have got a view of like what's the direction of travel for them. And we did used to have, was it SMEPs, school music education plans, that they were often seen, I think, as additional work, essentially. But hopefully schools are already doing music development plans, which can link into your school improvement plan. And then finally, another thing that might be interesting to schools is the new lead school role. So schools with really high quality provision may be identified by their hub to work broadly across their local area on the design of CPD or peer-to-peer support. This is quite similar, I think, to what already exists in terms of the maths hubs, behaviour hubs, I think there's languages hubs as well in other areas of the DFE. I know some schools will be really excited about it, partly because of the status that you get maybe from being a lead school, but I think we need to be really clear about the rationale behind this. It was driven behind the need to be able to kind of exemplify what is really good CPD. So, a hub can lead a music education conference, and that's all well and good, but sometimes you just need to see it in action, don't you? You need to see it. So we're hoping that across the country, there are going to be these schools who basically got their doors open, come in, see what we do, learn from us, work together, collaborate, and that will all be really exciting. There is definitely more information to come on the mechanics of that, but I think that's all going to start at some point next year, so that the schools are in place in September 2023. But I don't know much more than you. I am going to ask on Thursday. We shall see. And so, yeah, that is really the main nuts and bolts for schools. There's obviously loads more in the plan, with loads more detail because it's very long. And in case you haven't seen it, there is a summary of the plan on the MTA website. If you click on the little blue bar there on the icon, that'll take you straight to that summary. And of course, the plan you can enjoy at your leisure, because there's more in there about what the expectations are for hubs, for the industry. I think it's taking a broader look this time around compared to 2011. And the other set of resources that are out there are these self-evaluation tools that we have put together as part of the Can Do Music campaign. So that's a partnership between MTA, the ISM, and Music Mark. Now, I think that the brilliant Jill sent you a link to this in advance, and essentially over the next part of this session, we're essentially going to do like a guided reflection so that you can begin to review your provision, with the aim that by the end of this webinar, which I'm anticipating I'll finish just before 6, because everyone has got life to lead and everything at the end of the day, but you'll end this session with the beginning part of your development plan, so you can sort of have some concrete actions and concrete things to think about for the first year of the national plan. I think we need to be quite kind with ourselves to note that this national plan is likely to be a 10-year process, and it wouldn't be realistic to try and address everything in a 1-year development plan. And certainly I've fallen into that trap before when I've started a new school and thought, oh my goodness me, there's so much I want to do, and I get all tiggerish and you do loads of things and it's not sustainable. And some things are harder and they take longer to put together. So let's be kind with ourselves. And as music leads, you are like to be the owner of the plan. and that's why we'll look at it together today. But it's going to be more successful when it's owned by your school more widely. So certainly you would be looking for input from line managers, head teachers, maybe all of your staff. You might want to survey as part of it, even students to get their input, parents, other stakeholders, and conversations with your school hub, or even if you're an academy trust, with your academy trust lead, could help you to identify areas for development and opportunities that there are. So hopefully, so at this point, hopefully you've either got on the screen the self-evaluation framework, or you might have printed off. I can see Emily's got it printed. She's having a look through it. So thanks for that, Emily. That's awesome. And if I were you, I would probably have it on the page, like on my desk, with a pencil or a pen, ready to annotate, and to scribble all over, because this is going to be the next half an hour is going to be very kind of it's over to you, and I'm going to leave gaps so that you'll have time to think and have time to write as well. So you can see in the tool, if you've got it in front of you, there's two main aspects to it. So if you look at the blue box on the right hand side with that lovely little pie chart, we've got the sort of the areas of school provision that the plan talks about. So we've got the stuff in the classroom. So essentially this is like the stuff we'd expect, the curriculum itself, the space for the curriculum to happen, assessment, progression, all that kind of stuff. That's what I mean by in the classroom. Then beyond the classroom is everything that happens to do with music that isn't within timetable time. So essentially things like the clubs, co-curricular, concerts, assemblies, instrumental, one-to-one provision, etc. So that's beyond the classroom. And I think it's always really important to remember that those two things have got a symbiotic relationship. So if your curriculum is really really doing brilliant things, more and more young people will do brilliant things beyond the classroom. And if really great things are happening beyond the classroom, they're going to take all of that energy and knowledge and skill and put it into their curriculum provision as well. So in the best schools, what we see is this lovely link between the two, where both kind of energize each other. Then the third area of the evaluation tool is about leadership and management. That's about staffing, essentially, and the strategic direction of music. And the final area is about anything that is external facing. So how the subject engages with the community or with other sorts of partnerships it can get involved in. Really recognizing that music is something that like one of the great tools of music is the way that it brings people together, and it can serve a really important purpose in our schools. And goodness me, after the past couple of years that we've had in, nationally and internationally, I think, we've got a part to play. I think music has got a really, so much potential of what we could offer in our communities. So it's a nice way of codifying that and making it clear, like, what is possible. And within those four areas, how we've suggested a structure to this is that schools would sort of decide what category they might see themselves as. Now, this is not rating, it's not like there's no rank order, there's no league tables, it's not Ofsted, but maybe recognizing where you are on that journey. So are you focusing, are you right at the start of the journey? Absolutely fine, just starting the school, beginning to make things happen, fantastic. Or are you developing? Are things in place, but you can recognize areas for improvement? Secure, I would say, is a school that is like, this is a strong provision and there's lots of really good things going on. And enhancing would be for a minority of schools who are really doing like nationally significant work. These potentially might be the schools who will end up being the lead schools at some point. So I know exactly what teachers are like, and all of you be thinking, right, I want to get to enhancing, because that's what we want to do, because it's like Ofsted, isn't it? You want to be outstanding, but really, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. There is something about like just getting a really good, secure provision, because that is hard enough after all. So let's get started. Let's start by thinking about what it means to have a strong classroom provision. So if a school is at a focusing level, music might only be delivered ad hoc. and not every year group. But however, if you're in a developing category, you would essentially have a timetable subject. So music is happening consistently for every year group across the school from EYFS to year 6. Now, I'm not making a comment here whether the music is being delivered by generalist teachers or by teachers who have some interest or specialism in music or are employed particularly to teach music. Notice I didn't use the word non-specialist because, oh God, I hate that word. I'm just going to say the generalist teachers because that's basically what people are when they teach in primary schools. But it is taught every week and it is within the timetable. Okay, that would be a developing school. However, going into secure, so a school where I think it is really more advanced in their provision, the music curriculum itself is going to be at least as ambitious as the national curriculum, drawing on insights from the model music curriculum with a really clear sequencing. So I think schools who are using like a ready-made, I was about to say off the shelf, they kind of are off the shelf, things like Charanga, recognised resources with really strong, like a lot of good thinking that have gone behind them, you could make a case that you're in that category in that sense. But you might be looking at Charanga and going, oh, I'll take some bits of that, but I'm also going to add on other things. It'd be people who you really engage with it in quite a deep way. And on the enhancing category, it's people or schools where they are really enlivening the curriculum by adding additional experience to it. And that's, I think, where it blends in with the enrichment and co-curricular, for example, with concerts and things that are linked to curriculum as other experiences. So that's a sort of general area, and I'm going to labour on this one quite a bit because curriculum, I suppose, is like the biggest part, isn't it, of music provision in schools. So you might just reflect, where do you think you are on that continuum in your own setting? It might be that you've got aspects of some things, but not aspects of others. And you might want to just scribble all over the piece of paper or make some notes. Now, in terms of the engagement with the curriculum, let's think about what those different categories would feel like. So in a school that is beginning its journey and beginning to focus on their provision, progress over time is not measured or celebrated, and perhaps progress isn't even happening at all. Whereas in a school that's in the next category above, students are engaging with schemes of work and building areas of musical interest and growing skill. So there's definitely progression going on, and that is not just for some pupils, but it's for all pupils, including those with special educational needs who are able to participate and engage in lessons. So for example, if in a school some students are being removed from curriculum activities for one reason or another, or the curriculum isn't fully inclusive, I say it would be really hard to make the case that this is in a strong place. And again, that relates to quite a lot of the Ofsted framework as well. However, in a school where things are more secure, progress is good. Incremental learning of technical, constructive and expressive aspects of music. You might recognise that language from the Ofsted research review. So we're talking about technical skill, understanding about composition and some aspects of how that links to theory, with opportunities for performance as well, which is all about developing musical understanding, where these are all linked together. And students with SEND progress really well, and it might be that there's adaptations and support for those students. Now, all of this is not possible, as I said, without space and resources for teaching. And note that I think in some schools where resources are limited, it's going to make it really hard to deliver a full curriculum. And certainly I think the national plan outlines that you'd expect schools to have a set of tuned instruments and a set of untuned instruments. So, and this to be present in the curriculum, certainly by the time you get to year 5 and year 6. That might be an area that you need to think about. But you can see that the secure provision is maybe thinking about how music technology is being included. This might be an area for you to think about. So I've spoken quite a lot. Bit of a narration, a bit of metacognition. I'm trying to sort of think maybe while talk what you might be thinking about. Now, I went through this process last week with the school, and we did this process just as you are now. And I think the colleague reflected to me that the area that they felt that they wanted to look at was about that musical progress. And she recognised that through her curriculum, she thought there was less security with constructive understanding of music for her students, essentially to do with making their own music and understanding how music is put together, linking towards composition. So that was from the reflection, she kind of put that as a list, but she had other ones as well. So at this point, you might want to write a little list of maybe 3-4 areas that you want to think about. You're not going to do all of those this year, but that you might want to just list them. These are the things from this framework, from this section, that I think are areas that we could develop in our setting. Now, if you have any questions, this is a good point. You could pop something in the chat if you need to. I'm really happy to take any queries. And just if anything springs to mind, just throw it into the chat, or you could. I think you can send it privately to me as well. I'll make sure there's time as we go through to pick up on any questions. Okay, I think we're going to move on to considering the next area of music provision, which would be music beyond the classroom. Now, a key type of music making in primary schools, I know, is singing, and such an important part of developing musicianship, building your inner ear. Imagined singing is so good for developing like oral awareness, all of that, pitching and ensemble work. I mean, I could talk about it all day, how important singing is. And I'm sure a lot of you are doing loads of singing in your schools. But let's have a think about how singing, like what the progression for singing might be from school to school. So in a school that's starting its journey of focusing school, singing might be infrequent with not varied repertoire. So always using the same type of materials, might be from one genre, or always unison singing, not exploring any part singing. And that's great. That's a brilliant starting point, especially for getting the whole school community involved. But I think we could probably push it on and be more progressive, especially if we really want to develop musicianship and musical understanding. So what would it look like if it was developing? Well, we're expecting it to be frequent. I would say at least weekly. And many schools are doing singing assemblies every week, which is fabulous. But also within the lessons, so how music is interweaved throughout learning. And it's there for all young people, all students, and maybe for the staff as well. You know, when they all sit down the edge of the hall, that's always a lovely moment in primary schools. But if we're gonna, again, we're gonna challenge ourselves and think, we can do this, but can we really develop it further? I think it's about it being embedded into the life of a school, so that every child really has that experience. It's the schools where you go in and they're singing on the playground, and they pick things up in lessons, and then they're singing it as they go down the road afterwards. Some of it is a bit intangible, but it's where you can tell it's having an impact. It's really changing practice more widely, and that is driven by really a wide range of high quality age appropriate repertoire. I'm thinking about stuff from the usual suspects, Sing Up, Voices Foundation, Sing for Pleasure, all the great stuff that's out there. Kodai inspired as well, developing musicianship, and all staff in the school able to support singing. So the schools where music is even part of routines of daily life, about the line-up times, going to lunch, going to break, all that kind of thing. Music is embedded into the life of the school. But schools who are going even further, and I think this is really good practice, is about thinking about your long-term singing strategy. I know certainly in secondary schools this often needs to happen, to really think about it carefully, because it can be more difficult as young people go through voice change. So thinking about how do we make sure that all young people are involved? Are we thinking about boys and girls separately, perhaps? What are the different needs for the different groups? Thinking about diversity within singing, within the singing repertoire, opportunities for solo performance, linking to other potential partners in community singing, sort of links into the partnerships box as well. Loads of different possibilities there, and thinking more broadly about it in quite a specialist way. So that is the progression routes for singing. it might be that you're doing some of them and not doing others. And a really important part of that thinking, of course, that they might be involved in performance, but of course there'll be instrumental and ensemble opportunities for performance as well in your schools. So let's look at that next category. So in a school that's focusing, there may be barriers to that, but in most schools we would expect termly performances. And you remember that's on those 7 key features. And that's what would be the minimum expectation. So that developing strand, hopefully you're getting the thought, the idea that this is the minimum entitlement for young people in our schools. And if you think, this is not a stretch for us, this is not challenging, let's think about how we can build on it more. So music performance being a prominent component of school life from an early age. So we're thinking about those experiences in EYFS right up to year 6. And it's threaded through the life of the school in assemblies, events. Students are always able and ready to get up on the platform and to be involved also with the wider community in what they're doing. And as such, musical events take place regularly, maybe even twice a term. Some of you might be doing that even more than that, and that's great, and that's all good. But what would it mean if you're really, in terms of engagement with musical activities, what would be I would say like a stretch position for a school? Well, I know there are some schools that really monitor this very carefully, and thinking about who it is in their schools are engaging in music. And in fact, some schools are doing this across all of their enrichment more broadly. And as such, you can cross-cut that data and work out who is not engaging, why not, what is it about, what are the barriers, how can we break down those barriers, and all of that helps to demonstrate the wider impact that you can have. So just running a club as a starting point is great, but getting under the skin of how can we really open it up, make it as inclusive as possible, or even to serve a social purpose or to address something within the development plan would be a really interesting project that some schools may choose to do. For example, if you know that there's an issue around behaviour and focus and attention in a certain group of students, they might decide that a musical activity might be a good school improvement activity to add into the school. So that I think particularly is in the enhancing category. There are many schools who do that, and that's obviously great. And the final thing I think to consider, particularly on this beyond the classroom, is about one-to-one and group tuition, because I know it's like a real hot topic in primary schools. So in a school that's focusing, we would say probably it's going to be limited and inconsistent. From year to year, the offer might be changing. Students might get a couple of weeks of something and then it doesn't continue, so the taster is never really followed up. But within the national plan, it's quite clear that it's that wicked, is that what people call it, whole school ensemble tuition, is there as an entitlement and should be provided by schools on top of curriculum, and then the progression routes then identified and students supported through that. So that's one to really think about. And I know that one is really hard, often to achieve for all sorts of reasons at the moment, aside from finance and aside from staff. But I think that's the one where we have to be recognise our role really as gatekeepers. It's within our gift to know what is available in the community and have links to local music centres and to point families in the right direction for that provision. And I think it's a really important part of our role as music leaders. And that all links to the wider extracurricular offer, to make sure that there's activities in school, but also local opportunities as signpost. And in really great schools in secure provision, these would be increasingly specialist and would be really well attended. So all of that is worth considering. So I hope you've had plenty of time to reflect on that. Again, where are the areas where you think are that you feel confident that this is already happening in your setting, and where are the ones we think actually this is something that we could work on a bit over the year and the years to come. So the school that I was working with last week, what they recognised was they hadn't been able to push on with one-to-one tuition or small group tuition following their whole class ensemble tuition. So this was their aim coming up, to facilitate and support continuation of learning after students had had that whole class experience. At the end, I'll tell you a little bit the actions they decided to put in place for that. But that was their aim. And similarly, this is your point now. You might want to create a little list of what you think might be your aims based on the notes that you've made while I've been talking. Okay, we're going to move on to the next session, which is about leadership and management, things to think about. So, um, I think as you remember mentioning in the plan, it's pretty clear that that strategic direction is needed for the subject, and it's quite different to other subjects in the school. It's not just about the curriculum, but it's about thinking broadly about the whole offer for a subject. And we would hope in all schools that be someone who is named in post and they've had some kind of training. But all schools, we want that person to be really well supported, and that senior leader who is supporting them has an awareness of the national curriculum and is aware of the national plan. Some of that's our role as sector organisations, but also the role of people on the ground like you guys to spread the word of what are the expectations around the national plan, and how can we all work together to really bring it to life. And it's really important that those people also have like that broader advocacy from the local governing body. So that's why in the most secure schools there might be an LGB member who is always considering it and holding leaders to account for their provision. As such, music may be referred to explicitly in the school improvement plan, and you would have a department development plan in place, which all of you are beginning to create now, which means that you're already going to be in the secure category, which is very exciting. Training is a really important part of having a strong provision, because music is one of those areas that is evolving very quickly, certainly in terms of the way that technology is used, but also it's there's a real breadth to what we do in schools. We especially if we're on our own and we're trying to, which a lot of people are in small schools and particularly in primary school settings, and you're maybe being expected to do work with instruments and also work with singing, and you might have had music as your original degree, you might have fallen into a music role. So training is really important. And we really getting high quality annual training is key to that. Might be available from your hub. You might decide to invest in it through courses that are available through lots of different organisations. Particularly, I think like the Kadai training is always really well received and has a lot of impact. But there's loads out there, isn't there? And if you're part of Multi Academy Trust, they might also provide CPD over the year. But in the schools that are most secure, you might find that actually the whole staff body are involved in some of that training process, so that the music lead is having a wider impact across the whole staff. What great leadership training to be able to lead whole school CPD as well. So it's things like that I think they're really worth considering. But in the enhancing category, do you remember I mentioned about schools who are doing nationally significant work? I think it's likely that schools in that category will be involved in sharing their expertise with a much wider group, maybe regionally, nationally, and really being part of a collaborative learning community. So something to consider if you think that you've got a lot to share. Don't hide your light, and I think music is a really great, especially things like MTA, a really good opportunity for that. So the teacher that I was working with, it was actually really straightforward aim. She reflected, she said, oh, actually I realised I haven't really spoken about national plan with my line manager, so that was an easy thing that she was able to put in as her aim for this year. So reflect on where you think, which part of that you might want to move on this year, or even in later years, and maybe you might want to create a little bit of a list looking at that. Okay, we're doing well for time, and if you've made it to this point, you are brilliant. You're amazing. We already knew that because you're music teachers. But this is the final section of the evaluation form where we're considering the outward facing, the external part of the music department, which is about the community and partnerships. Now, one of the main partnerships that school music has is with the local music education hub, and I think I fully recognise that music education hubs operate differently from region to region, and some regions are really spread, so it can be quite difficult to get involved with the service part of the hub. If they're really far away from you, I work with some rural areas where it'd be like 2 hours to get to really to link in with where the centre of the hub is. So I know it can be really challenging, and the offer also is inconsistent and patchy, I think, across the country. The plan recognised that, but there's lots of ambition to change that over time. And I guess my case to schools would be that if in the past you have found that actually the hub hasn't been maybe receptive, or you haven't found it useful, this could be the year where you could give it another go. And at least if you know you've tried, then you know that you kind of, then the ownership is then onto them and not onto you. That's their role. They're funded by the DFE through the Arts Council. It's not like Arts Council money, like lottery money. It is DFE money that the Arts Council give out to work with schools. And I think typically the offer for primary schools is quite good in terms of big sings and curriculum resources and all sorts of things. So I would encourage you to make that link, to be that person and see where it goes. Go in with an open heart and an open mind. And schools, I think, who can do that consistently can get really good offer, can get some really exciting opportunities as well for their schools, especially if you can, like, if you're in it and you're part of it as an active partner, you can also help to influence it, which I think is great. I know some people who are trustees of their music hubs as teacher members of the panel. Yes, that takes a bit of time, but it means that they can help to nudge and share their experiences with the leadership of the hub, so that the offer and the service to the schools is much better. So yeah, schools doing the regionally significant work are obviously likely to be a leading school in that area. So another really important part of the external part of the music department, or as a music subject in the school, is about that community links. So what role is music playing in bringing your school community together? So I'm sure there are lots of examples that you have of this, like where music is in the school fair, or where you might go and visit local community activities. I know it's been a little bit more limited around the time of COVID, but things are beginning to get more established. And I think schools who are able to build on that and put it like as a regular part of their offer have an opportunity to build not just musical strengths, but also it's about community engagement and volunteering. And we know that young people who get involved in all of these things do have more successful lives and go on to, they're more likely to vote, they're more likely to be, to do well in their exams, etc., etc. And there's quite a lot of research around that. So I think music has a potential role in that area. It could even be, your year fives and sixes going to do some stuff with the early years provision in the school. It doesn't have to be so broad, but it is something about building links with the community. And the community doesn't just stop, doesn't have to be, with organised organisations, but it could be simply through your parent body. And I think tapping into the parent power, particularly for music, is a really powerful one. So not just inviting them to concerts, but how can they be engaged? How can you help to them to nurture and support their students' progress? Because we know that if you're learning an instrument, you really do need to have the parents on board. There's that like triangle, isn't there, between school and child and home. If they're going to practice, you've got to have the parents on board, and you may want to consult on them, and you may want to bring them into school and get them involved with school music making in some way. Obviously, being careful about safeguarding concerns on that. So there's loads of scope on how you can make external partnerships and really make music at the centre of your school offer. Let's have a look and see what the school I was working with reflected. Well, they were thinking about this parental carer support. They really wanted to build better links with families so that support for music develops, so that what was going on in the curriculum and in the school could be continued to be nurtured through all those homeschool links, recognizing that like music is actually a really lovely thing that can also bring families together in some way, in the same way that sport can as well. We'll talk about the actions in a second. So you'll probably have a little list of things as well. It's not such a large area as the in-curriculum stuff, but it's just as important, and you might have some ideas of areas that you are thinking about. Okay, I'm going to move on to the final section. So now you're likely to have a little list for each of those areas, for curriculum, for beyond the curriculum, for leadership and management, and for community. And this really is the starting point of your development plan. So at this point, you've got this long list, but you'd be thinking, which ones of these are most important at the moment in September 2022? So this is the kind of person I am. I'd get a colour, another colour code it and say, right, important. That would get a special underline or a special circle. But then I might take another colour and I might actually highlight the ones that I think are going to have the biggest impact. Which one of these is really going to make everyone sort of sit up and say, things are really like, we're doing something different now. Or it's going to be, going to access the most young people, for example. It's going to have the biggest scope for impact at scale. So I might be thinking that kind of thing. I might also look at that list and go, which are the easy wins? Which are the things that I could probably action in the next couple of weeks? Things that I could do quite easily. And they might get a smiley face. I would change my coding for that. And then finally, I might be looking at my list and going, which of these are going to be really hard and potentially a slower burn, a longer area of development, which ones might go across multiple years. Remember what I was saying about being kind to yourself and being realistic about what can be achieved over a longer amount of time. So hopefully it's another way of thinking it, because what we want to do now is begin to prioritize what you'll be doing. And I did that process with the teacher I was working with. And this is the order we got. And it mostly is in line with what was the sort of structure of the evaluation process. So the biggest priority area was around composition. We felt that would have quite a good curriculum impact, and also it would be across a wide group of young people. And then the second area was about that one-to-one tuition. Now that is a really big project, and that was going to be over multiple years. Then the third area was about community, family links, and then the fourth area about leadership. That was seen as being quite a big win, quick wins that could go at the end. But then the question was, how are we going to do this? So this is as far as we got. There's plenty more that can be done. Initially on the constructive part of the curriculum, to do with composition, to do with theory, there was we discussed about how staff CPD could be really powerful in this. Not just maybe going on a course, which would be the first starting point for people, but also about research, reading, looking at examples of this, particularly in things like BBC 10 pieces. How is composition structured and weaved into those sorts of resources? So that was the first area. The second priority area, we considered some of the actions that we could do, making links with a local music centre and making sure there was space within the school, and recognising like those two things are actually going to be quite a big project in the first year. Again, being kind about what's achievable within a year, and then going ahead from there. Because if you've got a good link with the music centre, that's actually nothing. You don't have to do anything in your own school, in your own setting. You can point the students in the direction there. You can kind of refer them on, which is exactly the right thing to do. On the third area to community, there are loads of things that could be doing in this space, but what the teachers decided that they would do would be termly informal tea time concerts. So for students who are having small group lessons or one-to-one lessons, to share what they were doing, cup of tea, biscuit, everyone come in with the families and have a little listen, and potentially to invite the tutors along for that as well, so they could make links with the parents. And also another area they identified was that they could offer some taster sessions for the for those families who are joining the school right at the start of their education journey, to give them a flavour of what the school was like. So offering some early years music sessions, which uh, if you've got experience of delivering those, they're just wonderful. They're not for the faint-hearted, I think, baby music lessons, but they're always a really nice thing to do. And again, would be supportive to your early years settings if you have that in your setting. And finally, yeah, the leadership one, that'd be easy, just to bring it up in line management, essentially. So that's start the development plan. That's a 22-23 development plan. And I think the difference for you in primary compared to secondary is that secondary schools often the development plan will initially talk about like results. They'll talk about key stage 4 outcomes and progression, and that's great, that's fine. But that's not all what a music department is about. As I said, music department is a more holistic thing, which is recognising its role within the community and the need to really be inclusive for all children and communities. So, as promised, I've tried to finish slightly early. This is the last thing I'm going to mention. We just revisit these 7 key features, because if one of these is missing, this should be part of your development plan. These really are at the heart of a strong music offer in any school for children and young people. And let's just think, if we had this in all schools in the whole of the country, in the whole of England, there would be such equity of provision, wouldn't there? It would be addressing some of the social justice issues around music and diversity issues around in and around music education. I think this would just be such a good starting point for all schools. And something that occurred to me around that live performance, things that you may or may not be aware of, particularly as primary schools, that there are good ways that you can bring that into your school. For example, I mean, of course, your hub may be able to support you with that. Live Music Now, a really good charity where they have early career musicians who are trained to go and do performances in schools, hospitals, care homes, prisons, etc. So you could look at them. Live Music Now. The Cavatina Trust, that does chamber music in school settings. And after all, why not just link with your local secondary school who may have musicians who could come in and perform to your students? What a great feeder transition opportunity, which would have pretty much no cost. So some ideas there to get you started. So that's the end from me. I hope you found this useful. I'm really happy to answer any questions. I'm going to stay on until 6 o'clock. Also, you can find out more about the Music Teachers Association by clicking on the link there. If you're not a member, there are loads of great member benefits, sessions like these, and also resources, and a brilliant annual conference, which is really great fun, and an amazing CPD. That would be a good thing to put in your development plan. And what else? The Music Teachers Association. Oh yeah, it's like less than a cup of coffee every week, so it's really good value for money. I have to remember all the things I'm supposed to say. And there's a podcast which comes out every 2 weeks, which you might not be aware of, but that's really great as well. So you can get that on all good podcast platforms. And it's that I think is a really good resource. I've got 2 dogs, and whenever I listen to that as I do my dog walking. That's brilliant. And yes, my contact details, if you want to just ask me questions, you're really welcome to get in touch either through the MTA, or you can email me, catherine.barker@unitedlearning.org.uk. I'd really be happy to help if you've got any questions. So thanks everyone. I'm going to stay on. If anyone wants to write some questions, I'm really happy to answer. But other than that, have a lovely evening. Have a great run into half term. Can you believe we're nearly there already? And thank you again. All the best for everything you're doing in our schools. Thanks.